Today, inside the endgame. For today, I prepared some very interesting endgames I found when I was going over the games from the New in Chess Classic that has been finished, like I think yesterday or 2 days ago. I'm not entirely sure, like within the last few days, which Magnus Carlsen won in the final against Hikaru Nakamura. So yeah, so I found several interesting endgames in this tournament, and I wanted to share with you today my discoveries. Some of them are, I think, pretty interesting. So I prepared in total 4 games. I am not entirely sure if we can cover all of them today because it's quite extensive. Some of them were pretty expensive, but I hope that we can cover at least 3. So this is what I would like to aim at. All right, so let's get started. So the first one, actually, I found very interesting is the game between Levon Aronian, which is already here on the board, against Shakhriyar Mamedyarov, in which this position at some point arrives on the board. I should maybe flip it from Black's perspective. Of course, Black is completely winning. There are like what, 3 extra pawns, right? And position is, wait, let me double check if OBS shows well. Maybe I should adjust maybe my Lichess board here. Yeah, like this. Yeah, looks like this is better, I think. Maybe I'll have to. Okay, like this is, I think, fine. Okay, let's keep it like this. Okay, so this game, as I was saying, Black is completely winning here. There are 3 extra pawns. However, I really like the technique that Shakhriyar Mamedyarov demonstrated and won this game. So in this position, many moves win. Knight c3 wins, Rook f4 wins, Rook f3 wins. There are literally number of ways to win this game here with Black. But Shakhriyar played very interesting move, Rook to f1. Idea of Rook f1 is, of course, to meet Rook takes f1 with Knight g3 fork, and after King g2, Knight takes f1, King takes f1. And now we enter this position. So essentially, Shakhriyar Mamedyarov gave away a piece, but it's important to note that he has so many pawns right now, and they will be pushed very quickly forward. And that's what he does, a3. So because this a pawn is so advanced, knight from g4 has to go back all the way to c2 and then eventually maybe even a1 to stop this pawn. And this knight will be very passive. Then, in this position, if the knight will be so passive, Black will be able to sort of begin pushing the g-pawn and basically win this endgame on 2 weaknesses. And this is exactly what happened. So let's see. Knight e3, a2, knight c2, and now king starts marching, king g8. King h7 was also possible. Mamedyarov chose king g8, king e2, king f7, king d2, king f6. Perhaps, as I was saying earlier, king h7 was slightly more accurate, but pretty much doesn't affect anything here, any evaluation of the position. Still, Black is completely winning. King c3. So, of course, it would be great for White if like this pawn could be captured. But the point is that right now, White is not in time to both capture the pawn and then head back the king side. And in this position, probably there are many ways to win this, but I really like, again, what Shakhriyar played in this position. So, Black to play. Do you have any ideas? If you've seen the game, of course, you know the solution, but still, maybe someone didn't see this game, so I would like to ask, what would you play right now here with Black? King g5, correct. King g5, this is the probably the best move. King g5, king f4, yes. Basically, we need to activate the king first. Before pushing the pawn, we should activate the king. Probably also g5, g4, and then king g5, king f4 wins, but usually the good strategy is to play at first king g5 and king f4, and this is exactly what Shakhriyar played. King g5, king b2, king f4, king takes a2. Of course, the pawn has to be captured, but this king right now is very, very far away from the king side. And now g5 simply goes forward, and white king is simply too far away, and so knight will not be able to stop the g pawn effectively, successfully, because best case the pawn, the g2, the g pawn will be traded for the knight, and white will, black will have a winning pawn endgame, and this is precisely what happened. King b3, trying to activate the king, g4, king c4, okay, just g3. Knight to e1, again, king goes forward, king to e3, threatening king f2, so knight g2 is the only move, king f2, knight h4, and finally, simply g2, king takes g2, and this endgame, this pawn endgame, simply winning. If after king d5, of course, it's very important actually that in this initial endgame that Shakhriyar went for, this pawn was still on a6. Because right now this pawn pretty much determines that black is winning and decides the game. Simply a5. So and after king d6, a4, Levon Aronian resigned. However, let's go back. Having seen this position, especially this one, right? I would like to take a step back and go to the initial position that that we started analyzing. This one, right? So if this pawn on a6 wasn't there, the entire line is not so clear. It's pretty much not clear if black can win this. Maybe even white can win this, because knight captures the pawn. And as we have seen in this endgame, if this position, this pawn wasn't there, what happens? White is winning, not black, right? So you always, that's what I'm trying to say, that whenever you switch, kind of like you change the character of the position and you go for, you know, like rook f1 here, which is a very committal decision, you have to be really careful, because you need to really assess well, need to be 100% sure that whatever you are going for, whatever you calculated, is right, because the margin of the error is very, very small. It's razor thin line. So that's why I believe that this example is very instructive. Even though here, you know, black was winning pretty much everywhere, right? In some positions, things may not be that simple. So that's why I wanted to show this example. All right, so let's go to the next game that I prepared. Next game I prepared was, I think, from the final game between Magnus and Hikaru. And this was the queen endgame. This endgame was also very interesting. Let me just yeah, queen takes f7. Yes. So this is the position I want to talk about. Right now we are interested from white's perspective. So let's look at this position. Seemingly, it's only extra pawn, right? Just one extra pawn. This white's king is very exposed as well, can run into a number of checks. And, you know, it's only one extra pawn. Pawn b4 is under attack. Potentially, if b4 pawn is gone, then a5 pawn also will be gone. It seems like the game is pretty close, right? However, I think that what the technique that Magnus presented in this game is very instructive as well, and there's lots to learn from. Also, having in mind that queen endings are particularly difficult, I would say. Why? Because it doesn't really matter. Okay, of course, material matters, but what matters most is who has the passed pawn, and how is the king's safety. So especially in this position, white's king seems to be totally exposed, right? There is only one, okay, not totally, there's one pawn on f3, but still it's pretty exposed, can run into a number of checks. So what white should do to win this. And here Magnus demonstrated very nice technique of centralization. Basically, if you guys pay attention to this game and how Magnus played, he always had his queen centralized and active, do the total maximum. So that's what I wanted to show in this game. So yes, MJ, yes, Magnus played queen e8, correct. However, let's understand what's the general strategy before we even start moving seeing the game. I would like to explain what is the general strategy. As I was already saying, white king needs to be centralized, but it must be done in a very specific way. The queen should be basically holding this pawn before and pawn on f3 somehow. And with the queen centralized in the middle of the board, it will be difficult for black to avoid same time trading of queens, because pretty much nearly all pawn games will be winning for white, because will be white has extra pawn in the pawn game, and potentially it will be easier to create a passed pawn. So because of that, it will be very difficult for black to keep the queen active and avoid same time queen trade. And if this black's queen is not that active, then white's king will have and white's black's queen is not that active, and white's queen defends all the pawns, then white king can simply go forward and hide in front of the pawns, sometimes behind the pawns. Will always have support from the queen, and potentially even maybe can win black pawns. So this is the general strategy. But first thing, we need to centralize the queen. So Magnus played with queen e8, king c7, and now simply queen to e4. No reason to give random checks. Like queen e7, queen e8 had a very clear idea of bringing the queen to e4. So this check makes sense. But after king 7, there is no reason to start, throwing queen c7, maybe some, queen f7 back. No, queen e4. For now, queen e4. There is no any checks to black white's king. Queen gets centralized, all pawns are defended, and and right now this is black's turn, and black always has to watch out for all the possible queen trades. For example, already queen c1 will run into queen f4. For example, queen c1, queen f4 already trades queens, and white has winning pawn endgame. Therefore, Hikaru played with king d6, and now we begin activating king to g4. Trying to play f4 and make this king pretty much safe. Of course, in such endgames, it's impossible to calculate everything. What you have to do and first is just to focus on basically accomplishing one thing at a time. So right now, first step was activate the queen and centralize the queen on e4, and then slowly push the king forward, then make sure all the pawns are protected, and slowly, gradually improve your position. So right now queen d3 has been played, king e7, queen e3, few checks, and now queen gets to c5. Taking into account that right now this queen on a1 has no checks neither from d4 or g1 squares, because queen covers everything on this diagonal, right? So queen gets a little bit more activated, so this makes sense. King g8, king f4, still okay, there is one check on f6, but very still king will go to the center, queen d1, and now king goes to e5. Finally, the king gets activated, and the point is that queen f3 doesn't really work, because white can play again queen to d5, and again pawn ending is winning, because white after queen d5, queen takes d5, is first to create a passed pawn here on the queen side and win the game. Black king is too far away from the queen side to stop those pawns, so queen takes f3 wasn't possible. And white activates the king, and this is generally a good strategy. Ideally, the king maybe at some point in the future will go towards a6 pawn and simply capture this pawn. And to be honest, this is what happened in the game. So king h7, queen d5, keeping everything defended, Again, there are not many good squares to give check. Let's say queen e2 is impossible because of queen e4 again. So queen a4 has been played, queen e4 back, king h8, and now king d6. Perfect strategy. So queen was maneuvering around, and with proper checks and shielding from black's queen, king was able to get from g3 all the way to d6 already. And black didn't do didn't do anything special apart from that. But this is the best way to play, and for black it's impossible to defend this endgame pretty much because of this strategy that white employs with the centralization of the queen and always controlling for the opponent's counterplay. Once this is accomplished, there is pretty much no hope here for black. So queen b5 followed, again king c7. King goes towards the queen side and ideally towards this a6 pawn and trying to win it. King g8, queen e6 check, again few checks, one this time, queen d6, activate the queen a little bit, queen e2, and finally f4. You can see time control in this game. I think I'm not. I think it was rapid. I think it was rapid still, like 15 plus 10, 15 seconds, 15 minutes plus 10 seconds, if I'm not mistaken. So, but I could be wrong. I could be wrong. Anyway, so here f4, right? After f4, queen on d6 covers both pawns. King is already not on g3, but already on c7, and wants to get to a7 at some point and try to win simply the a6 pawn. And that's the entire strategy. So once again, white needs to simply control whatever black is doing, make sure all pawns are protected, and ideally win the a6 pawn at some point back after activating the king. That's pretty much about it. And after queen b5, okay, queen c5, queen h5, throwing some checks. Again, very nice way to put the queen on e4 with tempi. And right now, queen is defending both pawns. Again, from the central square, defends both pawns, right? And now the king finally has a possibility to move to b6. And after queen b5, king goes to a7. King suddenly is safe here on a7. And pawn a6 evidently becomes a target that white will try to capture within next couple of moves. Still, Hikaru was fighting with queen f1, queen e8. Again, few checks to activate the queen a little bit, and finally move f5. So what is the idea of f5? Potentially at some point in the future, maybe Magnus wants to put the queen on g6 and then capture on the pawn on a6 with some checks or something, potentially. But most importantly, it's very difficult to defend, keep defending this pawn on a6. Because, for example, queen has limited number of moves. Those squares are not available because of this queen here on d5, and if queen e2, this didn't happen in the game, Magnus can play, for instance, queen e6. This is also important because right now, after f5, the queen is supported here and attacks this pawn and also threatens queen g6 maybe, and sometimes. So the game is just pretty much decided. So Hikaru tried queen b1, after which Magnus decided to defend this pawn rather than the pawn on f5, and he played with queen d6. But he makes sure that he captures pawn a6, and he will have two double pawns, two connected pawns on the queen side, which will promote the queen, and the rest of the game is pretty much self-explanatory. But the idea of bringing the king from g3 all the way, like g4, e5, d6, e7, finally b6 and a7, finally to get to the surround this pawn a6. Let me just maybe move it back here to this position. So the king moved like this, right? Just to get to a7 to surround the pawn on a6 is a very, very instructive idea in my opinion. And all of this was possible because of the centralized white queen, which was always defending both pawns up to this moment when, basically there was a trade of f pawn for the a6 pawn. Okay, so king takes a6, g5, and yeah, basically white pawns are simply much faster. and the game is just over. So let's just see till the end. Queen f1, king b6, king f2, queen f2, I mean queen c5, queen b6, king a7. Few checks, still accuracy needed, but in general pawns go forward. G3, b7, queen f1, king a7, queen f2. Of course, we shouldn't trade on f2, so that's why Magnus played queen b6, and b8 queen is a threat. After queen f7, queen b1, king h6. Of course, is already winning. And after queen g7, I don't know if Hikaru like lost on time or something, but anyway, position was lost because, or maybe he just resigned, because Magnus can play, for instance, right now queen h4, king g6, queen g3, and winning the g3 pawn, and the game is just over. So this was a very interesting game, I believe, even though it was pretty straightforward. You know, like already here with those two pawns, but the idea of bringing the king to a7 and all the way from g3 and keeping the queen centralized is, I think, very, very important. Okay, some questions in the chat. Why queen g7? Well, I don't know. But anyway, position is already lost. Position is already lost. There is no way to save this. So I don't know why queen g7, but anyway, nothing else worked anyway. So it was winning already for white. And why not queen takes b6, then g2, g1? You mean this? Yes, I will take. No, queen f7? What do you mean? I'm confused. You mean this, queen b6, right? Yeah, I guess I'll take, b8 queen, g1 queen. Yes, this was better defense. This was presumably better defense, but still, I believe that this should be winning. I believe that still this should be winning. I kind of didn't analyze this much already. Like, I just thought this was winning. I kind of like skimmed through it, but I agree this was better defense. Still, it should be winning in number of ways. One of the possibilities is, for instance, play move queen e5 again. You know, not the only way, but one of the possible ways to first of all centralize the queen. And with b pawn, I believe this should be winning. I can double check quickly, but yes, this endgame is winning. I quickly double checked, and this endgame is winning. You know, at some point this pawn will promote to the queen. Usually, the best defense with this king is to be, let's say, I think in this corner, like around those squares, because here with his king is here, there are always possibilities to kind of cover from checks with check to black's king and try to trade queens, obviously. So I think queen d6 or something like that. Maybe at some point, you know, get to play king a8 or b7 and king b8 maybe at some point, and somehow white will outmaneuver here. But I agree it was still the best defense. Okay, anyway, it was very nice technique here by Magnus, and the idea of king marching through from g3 to a7 is very, very instructive. All right, so next game I wanted to show a game of Hikaru this time versus Liem, Quang. And this was also an interesting endgame. This time Hikaru won. And the endgame I was curious to talk about is the following endgame. Actually, this endgame. So the last move, rook takes a4. White, Hikaru with white pieces capture the pawn and still has extra pawn. But the endgame is pretty close, I would say, because in this position there are only problems on the one side of the board, and of course white has huge chances to win. There are still certain defensive resources, especially with if black manages to activate his rook, and if it's not so easy to push those pawns, white pawns forward. So after bishop b6, this is what Liem played. F4 happened by Hikaru, and right now it was a very important moment in this game. So I would like to ask you, what do you think should black play in this position? G6, H5, Armani says also G6, okay. I agree, this seems like an optimal setup, correct? Any other ideas? Because so far we have only one idea. Usually it's good to have some candidate moves here. So apart from G6, activate the rook first, but f7 pawn is weak. Well, I don't know if f7 pawn is weak. Like, it's well defended by the bishop, right? And the king. Mostly by the bishop, because if you activate the rook or something, then the back ring would be an issue, and if f5, then rook a8, let's say black rook goes somewhere up the board, let's say to b3, b2, or b1, and at some point we'll play rook a8. The king will have to go from the h rank, from the 8th rank, and only bishop will be supporting the f7 pawn, right? Mani, I disagree with you, because sorry, not Mani, Chess King. If G6, G6, and if G4, H5, black seems okay. I disagree with you, because I can play, for instance, move F5. Rook B2, you looked at, for example, but you don't get anything from that. Okay. So in general, there are 3 ideas, right? Or 2 ideas? Yeah, so okay, let me start with G6. G6 I think is not that great because of G4, and then if H5, I'll play simply F5. And you're not gonna break my pawn structure, and actually I'm kicking your bishop out of E6, and white has very good winning chances. So this is not so great. King F8, your kind of move. Well, King F8 seems kind of passive, like I will just play g4 either way, and you know, I'll just push my pawns forward. All right, so here is the thing. One of you said actually the right idea here. One of you said the right idea. So let me let me say something. So in general, this type of endgame, you need to look for counterplay. Like if you just would defend passively, the white pawns will just, you know, march forward. Sorry, they will march forward. The king will come to support them. You know, like and you know, this will be pretty much over very quickly. White's plan is super simple. So the only way to sort of do something here with, and you know, with black, and the idea that of g6 at h5 is still not sufficient, because I can still play g4 h5 and then bring my king forward and so on. So this is not the way to go here with black. What black has to do here is to look for counterplay, and the counterplay can be achieved by activating the rook. And exactly, MJ. Rook b1, king h2, and rook b2 is the way to go. First of all, black stops idea of g4. This is the first and foremost stops idea of g4. And once this idea is stopped, there's also an idea from black side to play move bishop d5 and capture simply pawn on g2 because of the pin. And this is the best, by far the best defense. Pretty much it's the only hope here that black can how black can try to save this game. So you know, activity of pieces. Rook b1, king f2 leads to a similar thing. Probably, I mean, this you know, rook b2. Now idea to play, for instance, rook d4. And again, right now we need to somehow activate our pieces, because still, if white manages to easily activate, you know, will get out of this, let's say, pin with the king, get out of this pin with the king and push the pawn forward, white will win. So again, we should try to activate the bishop again, this time through d7, and then get to c6 to put pressure on g2. And suddenly it's not entirely trivial to win this. Black has, I think, sufficient counter chances out of nowhere. Even though it seems like white should be somehow winning, it appears to be not so easy. And of course, if white plays knight e4 or something like bishop c6, after trade of the, you know, minor pieces, the game should be just drawn, because 4 versus 3 should be definitely drawn. So I actually had a video about 4 versus 3 for Insane the Game from like, I think, last year. So you can watch it again if you didn't watch it, or like if you watched it some time ago and you don't remember, or if you didn't watch it, also, you know, there is some stuff about 4 versus 3 rook endgames. Anyway, so here I think the black had, with this rook b1, rook b2 idea, very good chances to save the game. There was also an idea for white to play king f2 and basically ignore all of this and just play king e3 for the activity. But if white goes for the activity, alright, so now we can capture the pawn already, right? It's not anymore extra pawn, and position becomes very tactical. And of course f5 needs to be checked, but again, bishop b3, rook a8, king h7. And to be honest, I don't see a clear path for white to how to make progress. Pawn on f7 is defended by a threat, but still is defended thanks to his bishop on b3. If this bishop is attacked, always can go to a2, worst case scenario, and you know, will be well defended at least. And this bishop holds everything on this diagonal, holds everything. So it's not easy to make progress here with white. I analyze it a little bit further. Let's say king d4, just rook h2, going after the h3 pawn, rook f8, and just rook f2 this time, basically meeting knight f7 with rook f5. And if h4, we can just throw in a check, stay back. Idea is also very often to play rook e3, attack this pawn. In general, black should have sufficient compensation here. After h5, for instance, simply go after the, throw in one check and go after the, e5 pawn. If king d4, potentially even rook c7 is fine. Yeah, I think rook c7 is the easiest actually. Just defend the pawn and pretty much that's it. King b4, rook e3, rook e8, simply bishop d5, just stay in place, and king c5, bishop a2. It's difficult, very difficult to make progress here with white. Probably the game is just drawn. So this was the best defense. Coming back again, rook to b1 was the best defense, but in the game followed rook to b2. Wasn't rook f3, knight f7 possible due to rook f5, knight g5? Let me see. You mean here? I would take knight g5, king g6. But yeah, good detail. Good detail. I will have king g6 here. If h5, I can take the knight, so it doesn't work. So yeah, black is fine here. But probably, if I think about after king g6, it is even white that only white that takes the risk here. Like I think black just wins a pawn out of nowhere, because rook f5, king f5, and e5 pawn is just gone. Okay, there's still knight f3, but I can play bishop d1. Probably white can make a draw somehow, but it's becoming not easy. Only black can win this. Okay, so coming back to what happened in the game. In the game followed he rook b2 instead. So this gave immediately a chance for Hikaru to play move g4. But of course, because it was a rapid game, right? It was 15 plus 10. Hikaru decided to play a different idea. He played instead rook to d4. And g4 was better. G4 was better because after bishop d5, simply rook d4, bishop g2, and rook d3. Just covers everything. It was important to push this pawn forward to make it to advance with it. And right now, if possible, of course, white would like to get the king to g3 at some point. Not possible yet because, of course, there will be bishop e4. Let's say white's idea is to play rook c3 and then ideally bring the king forward. Of course, like something like this can happen. White, as long as this king is not easily getting to g3, white still has some hopes here to survive. But in general, slowly but surely, white should eventually make progress. Especially this bishop on d5 is very unstable. If bishop goes here, we can even capture his pawn f7 suddenly. So this position is still very difficult. After rook d2, we can play f5, and at some point we're gonna play king a1, king f1, king e1 to sort of dismantle this setup of the rook and the bishop on d2 and d5 squares. And slowly but surely, white will make progress here, and potentially and probably it's just winning for white. So this was possible already, but here didn't do it. Rook d4 was played, and again the same idea, even though it wasn't that great already, it still had to be played. Rook b1, king h2, and rook b2 again, because this is the only way to stop pretty much g4, only effective way to stop g4. And even after f5, just okay, bishop a2. Bishop, as long as there's squares on this diagonal, this bishop is fine. And again, I analyzed it further, but I couldn't find a clear path here for white to win. Always white is much better, of course. There are lots of chances, and it's already much trickier than earlier what we analyzed, but still pretty close to a draw. So this was still the best defense, but Liem played move f5. So this was a very bad move. But let's see now, what would you play with white in this position? White to play, what would you do? Okay, various ideas I can see. Looking at the passive should be winning. Not 100% sure. Depending on the rook activity. Not 100% sure if it's winning. Pretty close to a draw actually. Knight c4, bishop takes c4. I think it should be with correct defense a draw, but I'm saying it very carefully. I'm not 100% sure, but I would assume there's a way better defense than with knights and bishops on the board. There's the okay. There was the idea of to play king h2. I think king h2 is a little bit, I don't know, like slow. Like doesn't take into consideration what black wants to do. So king h2 I think is a little bit careless, I would say. Even in such position, you have to be accurate. There was someone said here earlier, I can see, that rook a4 is the first instinct or something. Right? First instinct is to go rook a4. Okay. Yeah, rook a4 is definitely, one of the possibilities. Yeah, rook a4, where they have rook a8, maybe rook e8, and then push the e-pawn, one of the possibilities. Or the idea to play rook a4, where they have rook a7, knight e8, also possible. So, so rook a4 is definitely a move, but also you were suggesting move g4, right? In this position. For white. g4 is also interesting. This is definitely interesting, but I'm not entirely convinced by this idea. I see a logic of it, but I do not think it's that great. Let's say if I play, I know if G then f5 of course, yes. But let's say after G4, I'll play move like G6 or something. Like I will keep it together. I'll hold it together. Still, your king is cut off on the back rank. Right now, I already threatened to take on G4, so I guess you have to take. Black white has to take. I take back. Actually, I don't take back with the pawn. My bad. I will take here with the bishop to keep it activated. If knight takes f5, pawn takes f5. And as I was saying, like rook endgame like this is not necessarily easy to win. If you play rook d6, I'll go rook b4, for instance. It would be much, let's say, better for white if this king was, let's say, already on g3. But it's cut on the second rank, and it's not entirely trivial to make progress here with white. Knight c4, knight d3. Well, again, if you play knight c4, I'm gonna play probably just knight bishop takes c4. But also, wait, I can play rook b4. I think rook b4 is the cleanest. You have to play rook d8, otherwise you're just losing a piece, right? After rook d8, let's say I go king h7, and you think you're gonna lose the f4 pawn right now. So this is not great for white. Okay, let me show you what Hikaru played. Hikaru played what one of you suggested, rook a4. And this is, as you can see on the picture, on the diagram, it is a mistake. It is a mistake. So why is it a mistake? Can you come up with the refutation of this idea? Because rook a4 is very natural, obviously. Try to activate the rook, try to get the knight to e8, attack pawn g7, or maybe go rook a8, rook e8. All those ideas are, I agree with them, they are pretty good ideas. But what can black do right now? What is the resource that black has in this position that pretty much saves the game for black? Bishop d5 is possible, but I will play simply g3 afterwards. Bishop d5 simply g3. And you cannot, I mean, you can play rook g3, rook g2, and rook g3, but I will, I think there is a problem with it. I will play then simply knight takes f5, right? And there is a problem with the rook being attacked, and also fork with knight e7, right? Like, do you see what I'm trying to say? Like, if you play bishop d5, I'm gonna play knight takes f5, rook takes g2, king f1, and right now, sorry, my bad, what I'm talking about, g3, of course, my bad. Rook g2, king f1, knight rook g3, knight f5, and rook is under attack, and so is knight e7 with the fork. So, and someone said here g5. Yes, g5 is the best move. G5 is the best move, and suddenly things are getting not so clear. And you say that the g5 fg, hg, I guess, knight is unclear to you. Well, it's unclear to me as well, but I guess that's a good thing, right? That's unclear, because here we can, you know, here it's clear why this, you know, much better, and if suddenly position becomes unclear, well, that's I guess a good sign for black, right? So after rook a4, this is what Liem played king h7, and this was lost. So g5 is a very good move. After, you know, takes knight e8. Let me just put slowly. Takes knight e8. You know, things are already, you know, not so obvious. Like, for example, I can play after knight e8, you know, like, I don't know, king f7. I don't see any problems with here. Like, okay, like knight f6 and so on. Like, there is not even one check with this. Knight f6, I don't know, I can play almost anything here. Like, I can play f4 followed by king g6. Like, why would a black be any worse here? Yes. Basically, g4 6 counterplay here for black. Again, similar as like earlier, rook b2, sorry, rook b1 and rook b2 was looking for counterplay connected with pawn g2. Right now, black tries to find counterplay regarding challenging its pawn structure, its pawn chain, and try to attack it, weaken it, and then find counterplay like that. So active counterplay again. So you say there 80. So h4 instead of rook a4, but it doesn't unlock the structure. Yes, h4 is the best move. H4 is the best move, and this move pretty much wins. This leads to a winning position for white. g5, the only counterplay connected with, that was here was with g5, and now it's blocked. It's totally stopped. And right now, white will be able to slowly, you know, first of all, play at some point g3, secure everything, bring the king to the queen side, slowly advance everything, and black has pretty much no defense. At some point, black's defense is gonna collapse because there is no activity available. There's pretty much no activity available after h4. Black is just stuck, and the fact that the pawn structure is blocked on the king side is good for white because it cannot, black cannot destroy it. Black cannot challenge the move like g5 and so on, and that's what white actually wants, because white has extra pawn. We don't need to look for pawn breaks. What we have to do is, you know, improve our pieces, and you know, if we activate our pieces to correct squares, some ideas will eventually show up by simply playing like rook a4, rook a7, knight d8, for instance. We don't need to win with pawns, we need to win with our pieces here. So it is not a problem that pawn structure is getting locked on the king side. Okay, so h4 was leading to a winning position. Does it make sense in general? All right, I assume it does make sense. So I would like to, I just want to thank you for giving me. You're welcome. Glad I can help. Glad I can help. Okay, h4. All right, so let's see what happened in the game. Rook a4, and Liem played king h7. Of course, it was rapid game. If this was not rapid game, let's say, he had more time, probably he would have played g5, because g5 seems pretty natural, and to change the pawn structure. Also, idea is like if this, there could be idea of playing simply rook b3 and giving attacking pawn g3, and throwing bunch of checks here and there, and this is not so easy to win also. So but king h7 is what he played, and right now Hikaru played a very strong move rook a7, and the game is pretty much already over, because the threat of rook e7 and knight d8, threats of rook e7 and knight d8 are irresistible pretty much, and the rest of the game is just nice technique here by Hikaru, and he managed to win it convincingly. King g6, h4, rook b4, rook e7, kicking his bishop out, h5, winning the pawn g7, pawn f4 is lost, true, but right now, of course, it doesn't really matter much because of knight e8, the idea that was always there, but now it works perfectly because this king is just so bad here on h5. Knight f6 also comes with the fork, and potentially also later g3 is the idea. So Liem had to give the bishop, but of course with being down a piece in such position is just bad. And after a few moves, few checks, king g6, and here Hikaru won because there is nothing else to do here with black. And here, this is how the game ended. So anyway, it was very interesting endgame, very interesting endgame. Especially the defensive resources that black had in this game, I think is kind of unique, because very often in such positions it seems like, okay, it's like on playing for two results, either white wins or a draw, and generally this is true, but still black can put very big resistance even in such endgames. And yeah, so I think it was very interesting. All right, so I prepared one more game, and I'm pretty sure I'm not gonna cover this game in its entirety, because the first three games took quite a lot, but still I think I would like to spend a few minutes on this game as well. So I mean, Hikaru and Magnus are both great. I'm not saying that Hikaru is any, I'm not saying anything bad about Hikaru. They're both great players, obviously. So yeah, I wanted to show one more game here against between Teimour Radjabov and Magnus. So let me actually start from the beginning. I'm gonna pretty much skim through the game because it's not that interesting. Let's say here, but here the end game started pretty much. So after knight takes e4, f5. This was, I think, novelty, or one of the rare moves, because there was a game bishop g7, knight g3, f5 between Teimour Radjabov himself and Wesley So in 2020, and in the game ended with a draw. However, I think after bishop d3, knight rook e1, knight f5, f4, Teimour had some pressure, but in the end, the game ended up being a draw. Still, probably he found some improvements on the way, but Magnus played here not bishop g7, but f5 right away, which is pretty interesting. So knight c5, king f6, rook d8. This was, I guess it was preparation by Magnus. King g7, rook takes h8, bishop takes h8. So what's the idea behind Magnus' play here? So in my opinion, he ignores the fact that his pawn on b7 is hanging in order to quickly develop his pieces and look for active counterplay, and that will holds the balance. For instance, knight b7, knight c6, of course, is an extra pawn for white, but black should have sufficient compensation because of this dark square bishop on h8 being active. Of course, after playing, let's say, king e7 or something, this bishop will be very active. Idea of rook b8 and so on. Black should have enough compensation here. So Teimour played bishop c4, which is a very, very good move. Knight c6 anyway. Yes, if knights are traded, of course, we should be a draw comfortably. But we will see actually what happened in the game. So knight c6, knight takes e6. And right now, I think Magnus mixed up something, because he played knight d5, which I think is a little bit inaccurate. I think rook c8 was very strong, and after king b1, only knight d5. Maybe he mixed up move order or something, because according to my analysis, this was linked to total equal position. However, here Magnus played knight d5 after bishop d5. The difference is that right now, after rook c8, I don't have to go king b1, but I can go king d1 or even king d2. But king d1, according to my analysis, is a little bit more accurate. And after king d1, knight d3, king d2, for instance, tactically white has some chances here. Of course, black should probably equalize with some correct play, but still it's not so easy according to my analysis. I want to go into detail. This is not that relevant. This is what I want to show for this game. But just to arrive at the position that I want to talk about, I had to start from this position. So Magnus played knight d3, which is already a big mistake, because after right now king d2, you cannot take on f2. I mean, probably you have to anyway, but this is not something you want to do, because after rook here, knight e4, bishop e4, king e6, bishop f5, you are simply pawn down. And if knight g4, I assume that h3 and g4 is simply winning a pawn as well. So white retains the extra pawn and very, very good winning chances. That's why here Magnus decided to play knight b4, looking for counterplay in this way. But this already allows Teimour to capture pawn b7. And after rook b8, knight c5, rook d8. He has two extra pawns, king c3. Knight a2 is of course very shaky, because knight may not simply escape from a2. And after a5, a3, white essentially has two extra pawns. But Magnus managed to save this. He was pretty lucky though, but still managed to save this. And I would like to show a very nice idea that how... by the way, Teimour played great so far and this game. And he put lots of pressure on Magnus, king b3, knight d3. Here in this position, according to engine, king c2 was the most accurate way to play, and by some weird moves, weird variations, computer simply wins or something. But king c4 is a very human approach, and I really like what Teimour did here, because after rook d7, bishop c6, rook c7, king b5, bishop b2, he gave one pawn away, but he kept his king and bishop active. And after a4, he has only one extra pawn, but with such active bishop and such active king, and quickly activating the rook to the game should be pretty much winning. And his technique was flawless up to a point. Rook c8, rook d1, bringing up pieces. Now, very important move, f4. Basically, the idea of f4 is to fix this pawn f5 as a weakness, and further try to attack it with moves like rook d5, bishop d7. And make sure that this rook will be very passive on f8 or somewhere on the f file, defending passively the pawn on f5. And this is winning for white. This was perfect technique so far. Rook b8 has been played, king c4, bishop b4. Of course, rook comes to d5, as I said. Bishop d7 is the idea. So rook f8, bishop d7, h5, g3 makes sense to make this pawn chain, and very, very solid pawn chain. Bishop e1, rook d6, throw in some checks, attack and win a tempo. So now king d4, very good move, and bishop e1. So here is the position I want to actually talk about. And so far, Teimour, as I was saying, presents a great technique. However, right now he started drifting. Maybe because of the time pressure, most likely. This was, as we know, rapid game. And he managed to spoil this, and unfortunately for him, he didn't win the game. So I wanted to show one very simple but very neat idea how to win this. The best way to win this is to play move king to e3. And first of all, make sure there is no counterplay on the queen side, because the king will come to f3 and support all the pawns on the king side. This is the first step. Basically, black cannot activate the rook because this rook is stuck to the pawn on f5, right? So if this is the case, I can bring my king to f3, and then I can look for ideas. So this is the first step. So let's say he plays h4, right? Trying to activate this. Of course, even if h4 doesn't happen, there is no difference. H takes, rook f6. So what is the next step? Next step is to simply bring this bishop back to d3 to create this spin on this king, and then play g4, and the game is just over. So that's why bishop b5, like bishop b4, for example, bishop d3, and g4 follows. Even rook takes f5 should win, and then g4, but there is no reason to enter this endgame, because g4 right away simply wins. And if black plays move like rook b6, then bishop d3 as well. Rook f6 at some, he has to pretty much go back. Rook b3 simply king not king e2, sorry, g4, my bad. G4 simply wins as well. So there is pretty much no hope here for black, just no hope. And once the bishop comes to b5 and to d3, pretty much white easily wins. The only thing that Teimour had to do is to bring his king to f3 and make sure there is no counterplay. Instead, what he did, he played rook d6, which was a little bit inaccurate, and probably again he just had to go king e3 right now, king e3, and try to bring this king here and bring back rook to d5 and revert to the same idea. Still winning, but he played rook e6, which is already inaccurate again. Bishop b4, and final mistake, bishop e8, and after h4 Magnus managed to bail out with a draw, and the game ended with a draw. Still, after instead of bishop e8, still there were some chances with king e5 and so on, but it's already way more complicated than it was, because the rook is not on d5 but on e6, and this gives black some better chances to save the game, because pawn f5 is not that attacked as it was, and it gives possibility for the black rook to get activated. For example, bishop c3, king d5, rook d8, king d6, bishop b4, king c7, and simply rook f8. Maybe right now rook will come from this side, and rook here, rook d5, finally king g6. Suddenly somehow black holds. It's not that obvious. Normally this king should be there, should be on f3 supporting those pawns, and bishop on d3, right? But right now those pieces are totally misplaced, right? So this is not entirely trivial anymore. Still white has some chances, but black has some chance to defend as well. But bishop b8, of course, allowed h4, and after pawn takes, rook f6, suddenly white pawn chain is totally destroyed. Pawn f4 is potentially a weakness. It is a weakness, and it's impossible actually to win anymore. The game ended very quickly, because with next few moves, they just repeated. Probably Teimour panicked or made some mistake in time trouble or something. But up to this point where he, this moment, he played flawless game pretty much. So if he played this idea of king f3, then bishop d3, bishop b5, bishop d3, I believe he would have won. Okay. Anyway, thank you very much for today. That will be it from me for now. I hope you guys found it interesting, those endgames, and I will see you tomorrow on Twitch when I'll be doing the simul. So thank you for today. I will see you tomorrow. Thanks. Take care. Bye.